All right, so today I'm going to be talking about DDoS attacks and malware spread, and also at the end I'm going to talk a bit about how you can improve your zero trust strategy with a number of different solutions. So, I'm going to talk about the DDoS threat, which many of you have probably heard about before. And with A10, we do a threat report, which comes out every 6 months to a year. And our latest one just came out recently, so we thought this would be a good topic to share because it does talk about some malicious software in here, as well as regular DDoS threats. And what we saw in our 2022 report is the number of weapons has grown significantly. We've seen there's real-life repercussions when these things happen, and also that these attacks can be launched anywhere and any time. And I'm going to be talking about each one of these in a little bit of detail. Now, why is this important? If you open up your browser and search for DDoS, you can typically find there's some type of attack which has happened. Some are more interesting sounding than others. For example, Russian hackers attacking the Eurovision Song Contest in Europe, to banks and stock exchanges in New Zealand being attacked, or as one of the central examples on here is Microsoft dealing with one of the largest DDoS attacks on record at 3.47 terabits per second. So there's lots of these attacks around, and the reason for this is these are pretty easy to do, especially when you consider that the attack surface is growing out there. When we look at all the different changes in IT and technology out there, they're having an effect of enabling more and more compute power to be available, allowing these attacks to be faster. Whether we're talking about 5G, with ultra-reliable low latency and many, many devices, whether it's cloud adoption and instances being set up and used to attack different organizations out there, or even just your regular phone CPUs or your laptop CPUs increasing in power. They can generate more requests with much larger payloads out there. Now, the motivations behind these haven't really changed for the last 20 or so years, but they do go in waves. The one which is missing off this particular slide is nation states, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's come up recently with some of the conflicts. But there's still the classic ones out there. A couple of years ago, a man was convicted in Minnesota for 15 years by the FBI for attacking his former employee. So he definitely fits in that disgruntled employee category. There was a case of a 16-year-old in Northern Ireland launching an attack against a major telecom provider in the UK. So there's all these different types of motivations, sometimes money, sometimes for fame, sometimes for revenge. Now, going back to the three things I mentioned briefly on one of the first slides, was the number of weapons has grown significantly in the past decade. And when we look at it in our current report, we track 15.4 million potential weapons. So these are systems which could be co-opted for DDoS attacks or malware. And when I talk about malware in this instance, it's really talking about botnet agents. So currently we track around 423,000. And this number does vary over time based on infections and the vectors which are out there. So we've seen this number be as high as 800,000 in previous reports. And this can be tracked to things like individual ISPs being infected in a very bad way. And we saw one particular one in India last year who basically had a very large number of botnets on their network, and then it got cleaned up. Right, so this number will be varied, but it's something we need to be vigilant about and make sure that we keep our networks clean to stop the spread and also to stop exfiltration, ransomware, and whatever it might be. Now, the reason why we see these numbers generally increase is for a few different things, but this chart I find is particularly interesting, and it came from our head of security research. And if you look at the chart on the right, the number of CVEs which are reported vulnerabilities has been increasing, and this allows bad actors to weaponize some of the exploits. So this is one of the big reasons why we need to increase our security attention to this type of malware. Now, another example which which basically backs this up is if we look at the Apache Log4j issue, you can see that there was disclosure in December of 2021, and then very quickly exploits were operationalized against it. So the spread of these things is very quick, based on the availability of the information which can be exploited. And also, the other thing is when we talk about these massive attacks like 3.47 terabits, et cetera, the reality is most of the attacks are a lot smaller and they're under the radar. So, when we look at, this data from IDC, 15% of organizations faced over 100 attacks in a year during the pandemic. 69% reported DDoS attacks that were under 10 gig. So a lot of the smaller attacks might look like regular traffic, but it could actually be bad actors and malicious traffic. And also, a lot of the stuff doesn't get reported. AWS and Microsoft are reporting data now on DDoS, which I think is commendable. But there's also many people who are dealing with these types of attacks, and we're really in an era of protected and unprotected. So this example from LeaseWeb showed, which is one of our customers, they blocked over 25,000 attacks in a 90-day period. So you can see that there's a lot of attacks which are happening on a regular basis. Now, I'm just going to speed up for some of this additional data and just talk about the real-life repercussions. So on the first day of the conflict in Ukraine, we actually saw sustained attacks. And this was a heat map we published in the report, but this is the actual raw heat map. And you can see there's some light purple things on here, but a very big item on here in the Donetsk region. And basically on the day of the attack, we saw machines in the U.S. Were being requested to attack that. And one of our own honeypots saw 2 million UDP Apple remote desktop requests to a subnet block in that region. And this was on the same day of the attack, about 6 to 8 hours after the physical attack happened. The second one on here was 600,000 NTP requests. Again, this was to one of our honeypots in the U.S., and it was trying to direct the traffic back to the Secretariat of the Cabinet of the Ministers of Ukraine, which supports the President of Ukraine. So these amplification attacks are basically trying to co-opt systems not just in these war zones, but also which we can operate on a daily basis. Now, just switching gears over to the last one of these 3 points is DDoS attacks can be launched anywhere and any time. And when we look at where these weapons are, you can see that they're spread, all over the globe. Right now, China is the one with the most potential DDoS weapons out there. USA is number 2. Sometimes there's flip-flops, but this is the case. We also find that when we look at this data, generally some of the most connected countries in the world have more potential weapons out there, which makes sense because there's more systems. And going to this next slide, this represents the same idea in a different way. So basically, when we look at the North America population, there's basically 2 weapons per person in the U.S. as there is in Asia. So even though it has a larger population, there's more weapons per person in North America. So basically, a lot of the systems in developed countries with very advanced systems are being preyed on to attack organizations around the world. And then we look at the propagation, it truly is a global problem. So going back to Log4j, even though we saw a lot of the scanners originated from Russia, you can see they infected organizations and propagated around the world as well. And this is just some examples of that, which is explored more in our DDoS report as well. So what we believe is really there needs to be a proactive DDoS defense is the only way forward using automation. And automating is key because there's so many different attacks and so many different weapons and so many different ways to mitigate these attacks that you need to be able to automate these both in policy and with multiple different policy elements. Implementing zero trust is something which is good across the board. It's not just for authentication. It can also be used in multiple different ways to, for example, look at the connections coming in to make sure they're legitimate and to help deal with DDoS attacks. But it can also, you can also look at it to stop the propagation of malware before it launches those DDoS attacks, as an example. And being able to monitor your network to ensure that it's operating the way you want is also key. And being able to push policy out across that whole network is another element. So just I'll go through a couple of different examples here, but automation on DDoS is one of the big things that we see a lot of organizations are doing right now. And the automation on here is everything from automating the environment you have, so having a baseline of what is good and good traffic in your network, so you can check for anomalies as an example. Also, automating threat intelligence. So there's a lot of known bad IP addresses out there. Rather than use some of the advanced techniques out there to block these bad actors from known bad IP addresses, we recommend just blocking them outright and doing it instantly. This also makes your security infrastructure more efficient because you're blocking without having to use more CPU power to do more complex algorithms to analyze traffic. So there's multiple different ways you can do it. And then also using artificial intelligence and machine learning to look for those more stealthy attacks which are coming in, and possibly those ones without known characteristics out there. So let me just talk about that a bit more. So one of the things we have is zero-day automated defense, and this is a really good example of automation, which can be on a layered approach with threat intelligence, the regular security policy, looking for malformed data and traffic coming in. But with this, what we can do is look at multiple characteristics of the packet, around 40 or so different characteristics. And if it is anomalous, what we can do is create a signature on the fly, and then we can block that bad traffic. And you can choose to manually implement it, or you can automatically implement it, depending on your tolerance for doing these things. But what we found is this definitely works for dealing with those attacks which are unknown. Here's an example from when we launched it a couple of years ago from a large gaming company. And on here, you can see they actually had some attacks which were 50 million packets per second and over 200 gigabits per second. And it automatically created a filter and automatically blocked those attacks coming in. So again, this is a good example of automation, which takes many forms, but this is just one of those. Now, going to zero trust, the things I talked about before can help, analyze those flows to make sure any legitimate flows come in. But, there's obviously a lot more to zero trust, right? We want to remove implicit trust. We want to look at multiple different characteristics and also multiple different types of flows and do multiple different things, not remove privileges where needed, make sure everything is inspected, not just for authentication, but for other items as well. So one of the things we also can do, and this can help with that blocking of that malware and that botnet propagation I was talking about earlier, is use TLS and SSL visibility to create a secure decrypt zone where we can decrypt traffic, send it to multiple security devices, or even add things like URL filtering and other things onto your network to block those bad actors or analyze the packets. As well. It can also analyze your environment, check your TLS and SSL security protocols to make sure they're up to date. So we have security in that with our SSL visibility product, but we also work with many other organizations such as RSA, Cisco, etc. And we can do the encryption once and also help to be budget friendly, because we can do the encryption once instead of having to buy larger appliances for multiple different vendors to be able to create that secure decrypt zone. Another thing also I was talking about earlier is to stop the spread, the malware spread, and stop DDoS attacks and other things. When you're deploying your applications, one of the things we want to do is make sure we have consistent policies, and we can do this with a hybrid cloud control. So within our application delivery range of products, we can set security policies, traffic policies, etc. And one of the challenges right now is in the cloud environments. Typically organizations have on-premises and also public cloud environments. So we can deploy our application delivery controller in a range of form factors, from containers to Azure versions to hardware appliances, whatever you might need. But we can put a consistent policy out there to those different environments to help your zero trust policies. And this is all tied together with our Harmony controller, which gives very good visibility into those different traffic patterns, so that you can enable your DevOps team, for example, to see what results their code pushes are happening with them, or if there's any errors on servers, or if they're operating in an anomalous way, maybe because they're affected with malware, whatever it might be. And here's just an example of some of the graphics you can see if you're in the Harmony controller. So this, you can instantly see if there's a 404 error, or if the server's down, if there's unusual traffic coming from any particular place in the world, because you can see that there's, if you're college, for example, in New Mexico, and you have a million requests from Russia, that might be unusual. So you can use this data to make better decisions. And really, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, we're in an era of the protected and unprotected. That Microsoft example I gave earlier with the 3.47 terabits, they basically announced they stopped that attack and it did not impact their service. So, and the LeaseWeb example I gave earlier, these are all organizations who are providing defenses to their organizations because they're proactively putting in place different techniques to stop malware, DDoS attacks, etc. And proactive automated approach is obviously a good one to have. So just in summary, we recommend you employ zero trust techniques, leverage AI, threat intelligence, global orchestration, and traffic visibility to be able to stop different types of threats out there, and also make sure you can implement the zero trust policy effectively. And then be informed by reading different reports, whether they're from AWS, Microsoft, or even our own A10 2022 DDoS Threat Report, which is available at a10networks.com. So with that, I think we're about done, so I'll pass it back to you guys.
Great, Paul, and thank you so much. Great presentation, such great information in here. And we'll definitely want to go ahead and get to some questions. We do have them, guys. Put them in. We have time for a couple of questions. And then let's start with this one. What are the pros and cons of on-prem versus cloud DDoS options? A good question.
So with DDoS defenses, there's a couple of different things. It really depends on what you're trying to protect. So, a lot of the attacks, are small. I think I mentioned they were under 10 gigabits per second. So, if you're running a data center, you probably want an on-premises solution to be able to block those attacks to relieve the rest of your environment, maybe your firewalls, etc. If you're running a data center with massive pipes coming in, you definitely want to have a DDoS scrubbing solution which you can deploy into your network. Most large service providers, gaming, universities all do this. If you're a smaller organization and you've only got a few servers and you're just more worried about your pipe coming in, i.e. the connectivity, then you might want to use a cloud solution. But they're very different things, and it really depends on what you're trying to protect. But in some instances, you might want to do both.
Okay, there's another question. Can you explain the other advantages of standalone TLS decryption?
Yeah, so one of the questions we often have is, my vendor has TLS decryption built into the appliances, which I kind of mentioned earlier. So there are various documents out there, from the NSA, et cetera, which, one of the quotes I often say is, from that report that they did was, do it well, do it once. So that way, keys are not distributed across multiple devices. You can keep track of them. You can get better bang for your buck because you have one device doing the decryption for multiple products, and you can also load balance and protect your investment to those solutions because you can set weighting so you can still use your old devices if you want to. So there's a lot of advantages of having a single solution which can give a better ROI than just buying it, say, buying it in one firewall, buying it a second firewall, buying it in a third device, because you're essentially doing the same thing 3 or 4 times. So it might sound like it's good, but it might be actually counterproductive.
Great. And then we have some more questions. We're going to get them over to you, but I went ahead and I moved it back. We've got your URL right up there, a10networks.com. I know the 2022 DDoS Threat Report, but people can also go there. They can sign up. They can start that 30-day free trial. Is that the best way to get more information about your product, to get that report? Are there better ways to get in contact? What do you recommend for people who want more information?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So, yeah, you can definitely read about the threat report, register and download that. Or if you want to talk about, because I talked about many different things on here, from application delivery through DDoS protection through TLS decryption. If you want to talk to a salesperson or their SE to architect how it might fit into your network to see if it'll help you, then there's a contact us page on the A10 Networks website as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.